If you check out our website under education, the tab, we do have several resources. And one of the things we have going on right now is that we have funding available for teachers, for schools to come to the museum, and we're able to reimburse their transportation. We're able to cover the admission, and we provide lunch and snacks for the student, and we're able to do activities with them and send them home with the museum souvenir. And that's a really great opportunity for schools that, I know right now budgets are being cut everywhere, but we're able to provide that if a teacher's interested.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Spotlight Houston, where we bring you the best people, places, and events in Greater Houston. In honor of Black History Month, we're exploring the rich and often overlooked history of African American soldiers in the U.S. military. Did you know that Black soldiers have fought in every major war since the American Revolution? Today we're diving into the incredible stories of the Buffalo Soldiers, their legacy, and the impact of Black and Afro-Latino service members throughout history. Joining us is Dr. Michelle Tovar, Director of Education at the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum. She'll take us through the museum's fascinating exhibits, the untold stories of Black and Latino soldiers, and exciting plans for a bilingual expansion. Plus, we'll hear about the special events happening at the museum this month, including a virtual talk on Black Marines at Iwo Jima, a live script reading event, and a book talk on Harriet Tubman's legendary life. This is episode 124, with an original air date of Monday, February 10th, 2025. Spotlight Houston is brought to you by Story Zone Media. And now, here's your host, Blanca Quezada.
As all of you know by now, February is Black History Month. And Houston has a lot of locations right now where they're having events or festivals or something in honor of Black History Month. And so I hope you've been making plans to attend as many as possible, but make sure that you include in your list the Center for African American Military History, also known as the Buffalo Soldiers National Museum, because it is very interesting. It's a place where you learn how African Americans have played a major role in contributing to this country's military history and just making a huge difference. And it's the museum will highlight from the beginning of the American Revolution to present day, and amazing history there. Amazing. So basically, to tell us more about this very special museum, which I really want you to know about, I've asked Dr. Michelle Tovar, Director of Education, to join me to discuss what we can expect to see and learn when we do visit. And there's a lot. Let me tell you, there is a lot.
Hi, Blanca. How are you?
Doing great. So, Michelle, welcome to the show. First of all, why was it so important to create this museum? And who came up with this great idea?
Yes. So this museum, Buffalo Soldiers National Museum, has been around about 20 plus years now. We'll be celebrating next year our 25th, I believe. If I'm wrong, my boss will probably hear this and be like, you should have known. But this museum was founded by Captain Paul Matthews, who had pretty much he was a Vietnam veteran, and he pretty much had this love to connect to history. He built a collection and was drawn to the story of the Buffalo Soldiers, which was a group of men that were, after the Civil War in 1866, were established by the United States government into different groups, the 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 24th and 25th Infantry. And so because of this history that isn't talked about, isn't really well known, he was really interested in collecting and trying to teach people through objects what this history was about. So eventually he collected so much that his wife pretty much told him, you need to get these things out of my house. And so with that, he worked to get the museum started with colleagues and friends of his. And they built the museum, I think originally was in closer to the museum district, which it was on Southmore. And it was a small home that he converted into a museum. And eventually they ended up buying the building where we are at now off of Caroline and Alabama.
And it's a beautiful building.
Yes, it's a very beautiful building that has recently been restored through the work that our CEO is doing to raise money to get the building up to par and make sure that we are there for a while. But the museum moved there, and if you've never been to the museum, you'll see that there is a vast collection of different, I'm going to say the Plains Wars, Indian Wars period up until the present. And the museum currently ends at the Gulf War. But when I was hired on actually 2 years ago, we wanted to be more forward thinking and talk about present day conflicts. And we wanted to focus on the inclusivity of the indigenous experience back during the Indian Wars. We also wanted to be more conscious of women's roles, right? And during these
Yes,
periods, because
definitely.
women were incredibly important in every part of the American war history. And also the LGBTQ community, right? Now that we're more in present day, that is also something that we want to
Right.
connect to our communities. And so it is slowly evolving, right? The museum has established a wonderful foundation in the Black African American community, right? And we want to expand this audience, our audience that we know that are going to museums, like Latinx students, students of different backgrounds. We want them to connect also to this history. And we're doing that by becoming, in the next year or two, a bilingual museum that will be able to be accessible for Spanish speaking families and students, anyone from that community.
Yeah. We
Mhm.
really need to, as different cultures, connect
Right.
with each other.
Of
Because
course.
first of all, we're human beings.
Yes.
And a lot of times we're put in the same type of positions or situations like people in the military.
Exactly.
What I have found interesting is that how did the African American men
Mhm.
join the Civil War and the American Revolution when they were slaves? I mean, were they still treated as slaves when they were enlisted?
Well, we know that during the Civil War, Frederick Douglass is a very important key figure, right, of that time. He put out in his newspaper calling men to join, right? He wanted men to understand the importance of supporting the war in order to show that they themselves were citizens, right? That they themselves could be a part of American history and everything. So his encouragement is what brought on a lot of these men. I believe that by that time, 180,000 African American men had joined the Union during the Civil
Wow.
War. Yes. And so it's a very important history, again, that we don't really highlight in schools. And the museum does want to also have students understand those key figures like Frederick Douglass, like W.E. Du Bois. And a lot of the women are also missing, right? Like in the future, we want to highlight also Ida B. Wells, who was a very important figure during World War I, because of her influence of speaking up about what these Black men were going through, right? Because yes, the men were a part of the military, right? To show patriotism, to show courage. But at the same time, a lot of these men, when they returned back home, faced a lot of racial violence. And many people don't know that, or it hasn't been talked enough.
Yeah. Right now, I can't recall her name, but she did a lot for the military. And she's recognized for, I think, I'm trying to remember her name, but she became a spy.
Oh, are you regard Cathay Williams? Is that who you're referring to? No.
No,
Okay,
no.
that's when we were thinking of our woman that we. I'm not
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
I'm sure there was a lot of women who were spies.
Truman, I think it's her name. What's her last name?
Say it one
Truman
more time. Wasn't sure.
or Tubbs? Truman, or
Oh, I'm not sure.
I think she became a spy during the Civil War.
Okay, I'll have
Yeah.
to look into it then. I can't recall at this moment, but yeah, there was a lot of women who were involved during that time who obviously could not participate as a woman, but instead had to dress as men. I mentioned Cathay Williams because she is someone that we highlight in the museum. She was known as the only Buffalo soldier who was a woman. She went by William Cathay, and she dressed like a man. But unfortunately, she got sick during the time that she was in her service, and she was found out that she was a woman and discharged from the army.
So what I think would be interesting to know is how so many men and women were able to join these wars when they were in, I don't know, plantations. They had owners. So how is it that they were able to go?
Well, once the enslaved people were freed, many of them did travel to different parts of the country. Many had finally decided they saw themselves as freed men and women, but they also wanted to see themselves as citizens, as part of society. And as I mentioned earlier, that's why many of these people did go into the role of the military to show that they could serve, right, for the country. But also they would gain education from being a part of this, of being part of the military. They gained many benefits in the sense of showing that they could also be a part of that, like a white man would be a part.
Yeah.
When we focused on the Buffalo Soldiers, we do show that a lot of these men were a part of the military, had established families, but also traveled around the country to different parts, right? And their main job was to help protect landowners, right? Like ranchers, help create railroads, help to be a part of the services around. And unfortunately, a lot of these men were also part of, during the Indian Wars, of the removal of the Indians, which was a genocide at the time.
Yeah. But they also became integrated with the indigenous peoples.
They did, yes. And there's a wonderful story that we do highlight about the Black Seminole Indian Scouts, who were enslaved people that came through Florida, up through Oklahoma. They were part of the Trail of Tears. They met with indigenous people, met with enslaved people. They traveled to Oklahoma, through to Texas, and then eventually ended up in Nacimiento, Mexico. And so that's a really important thing about our museum, is that we're starting to connect the stories to our different cultures, right? So there is currently an Afro-Mexican community in Mexico, right? A very vibrant one that celebrates Juneteenth, right? And they talk about their history. And the Black Seminole Indian Scouts had history in Brackettsville, which is in West Texas. And they had a language called the Gullah language that many of people there are trying to preserve, because it's something that, it was a part of their community. And unfortunately, as time passes, young people, if you don't teach them, they're not going to learn. They're trying to preserve that. And so we do highlight their story because these men were very important to the Buffalo Soldier history.
Yeah. Well, one thing that I haven't asked is, how did they get the name Buffalo Soldiers?
So there are many theories. Many people think that it came from an indigenous group. We don't necessarily know who it could have been, the Cheyenne, the Apache, or the Comanche, because those were many of the tribes that they did encounter. But one theory is that the men's color of their skin, right, their texture of their hair, was a representation of, similar to the way the buffalo, had the mane, the sacred mane. It's very curly. And of course, the buffalo was of a darkish brown kind of tone, right? So some people think that the indigenous groups may have seen these men and thought, oh, they remind us of a buffalo. But also it was possibly because of the fierceness of how these soldiers fought, compared to the buffalo as well being a fierce creature. Yeah. So there are theories, but nothing is set in stone. Myself and my colleagues at the museum have been researching to figure out, is there any documentation? We did find one documentation, but it's through the perspective of a white woman who her husband told her about the Buffalo Soldiers, but it was a bit explicit and not very nice. And so we don't go on with it.
So African Americans that have been in different wars throughout the years, why are they still referred to as Buffalo Soldiers?
So the name Buffalo Soldier actually stopped being used during the Korean War, when the military became desegregated. However, because there is a legacy, many of these Black military men and women have found pride in continuing to live that legacy on by calling themselves that. But now you have many chapters around the country that are significant to the Buffalo Soldiers. They might not necessarily be veterans. It might be just community people who want to continue that legacy and teach about the Buffalo Soldier history, but it's not necessarily used in the military anymore.
Mm-hmm. Well, what can we expect to see at the museum when we walk in?
Yes. So when you walk in, we're still stuck a little bit in the past, right? But the museum has a beautiful collection of objects, as I mentioned before, that go through a timeline of the Buffalo Soldiers from the frontier times to present day. So you'll be able to see objects that are either through documents, right, paper form, or through physical objects that were part of that time. One object that I really love is actually a recent thing that was established. It's actually a uniform from it's a replica of the uniform of one of the women that were part of the 6888. And that, if you on Netflix, that is a movie that just recently came out. And it talks about the story of a battalion that was created to help sort mail, right? During World War II, pretty much because a lot of the men during that time were not receiving their mail. And so these women were put together, I believe, I can't remember the number up here, but it was a very large group, maybe my colleagues are going to be like, you should have known. It was a very large number of women that were together who were part of this battalion who helped provide communication between soldiers, their families, and others. So because of that suit being there, I think it's important for people to see that women were part of World War II history. When you see World War II history, when you read about it,
definitely.
it's guys, right? Women were out there doing it too, and they were training hard, and they did a lot of great work.
They became mechanics.
Exactly.
All kinds of things.
They were, correct.
And so you mentioned artifacts, like do you have like rifles and other things like that?
Yes, we do have rifles, and currently right now, we have an exhibit that was created by my colleague, Kel Carter, who is the director of exhibitions, that's focused on the Buffalo Division, which is the 93rd Infantry, that he was able to highlight these men during World War I and World War II. And we have replicas of what arms they would have used during that time. We also have a helmet that you would have seen during that period, during World War I. And also, what's really great is that we also find text that highlight these men and their stories. And so you'll be able to see books from that period where they highlight a lot of these men's names.
Do you also have artwork?
We do have some pieces. Yes, we know that that captain has collected some pieces throughout his time that focus on the legacy of the Buffalo Soldiers. Very beautiful pieces that have been created, I believe, by local community artists.
You were talking about a lot of these soldiers going into Mexico. So do you have a special section that highlights the Afro-Latino history?
Not yet. That is my job. So what we're doing is we haven't quite put it out there, but the museum will be doing renovations, and we will be having a brand new exhibition in 2026. As I mentioned, it will be bilingual in English and Spanish, and we will be highlighting those Afro-Latino stories. For example, one of the Tuskegee Airmen, Esteban Jotes, was a Dominican. And so not many people know that. Not many people know that an Afro-Latino was a part of that history, right? And so he's not the only one. I just mentioned the 6888, the women, but the battalion, there was an Afro-Mexicana in that group. And there was others as well, Puerto Rican as well. And so these are the stories that we need to take out, right? They themselves identified as Black at the time, but they were of Latino descent as well. And so that's why we thought it was very important to have the museum be in English and Spanish, because we want people to come and read and get to see the stories of these men and women and connect to them.
Do you have any special program coming up or events that will celebrate Black History Month?
Yes, so the museum will be hosting for Black History Month several events. February 13th from 3 to 4 p.m., we're hosting a virtual talk called Black Sands to Black Marines, the Black units participating in Iwo Jima. So this will give everyone a kind of a highlight, a history of an untold story of these men who were at the Battle of Iwo Jima during World War II. That will be led by my colleague, Kel Carter, it will be virtual. So if you register online, we will send you a link. It's free and open to the public. We also will be hosting next week an event that's in partnership with Scriptwriters Houston, and it's a way to celebrate Black History Month through storytelling. And this is our first time hosting this incredible event in which people were called to submit proposals and scripts for the activity. And so what's great about it is that these directors, actors, writers connected to the museum's history and then wrote plays about it. And so they're going to perform the plays at the museum based on what they learned from the museum itself. And that is a ticketed event. It will be $5 for children and $15 for adults. And seniors, students, teachers, and military are $10. And one of our last events is also a book talk with Dr. Ada L. Fields Black on February 22nd. And she's going to talk about her book that she recently wrote about Harriet Tubman's legendary life. And so it's an incredible book.
That's who I was thinking of, that name, Harriet Tubman.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because I knew that she had become a spy.
Yes. So we
among
do
all
highlight
the
it.
other things that she did.
Yeah, we used to have a really great reenactment program in which we did highlight Harriet Tubman's history and her life. Our museum is now moving to a living history component, which is more about being interactive with a period and a time, right? Understanding from a historian what this person would be experiencing during that period. And so we usually have objects that are a part of it, in which students and young people, we really want them to kind of be hands-on and grab the objects and ask questions. And it's really great when the living historians can connect it back to the past and the present, which is really amazing because kids, their minds get blown away.
Yeah, that does sound like an amazing experience.
Yeah.
Yeah. So do you have tour guides that can explain what's in the exhibits?
Yes. So because the museum is going to be going through renovations, we did stop our docent-led tours. So right now we have self-guided tours, and we're able to provide everyone with either a brochure that they can hold or they can pull it up on their phones and walk through the museum space and read through the content in the brochure. If there is a specialized tour, we always request people to send us an email, and they can find us on our website and send an email and express the specialized tour that they're requesting.
Do you happen to have any stories that you can share, maybe from some of the historians, on the difference that the museum is making now within the community, and how it can also, I'm assuming that you're highlighting some of the heroes that we've never heard of?
Yes. So I think one of the greatest projects that we're doing now, and myself and my colleague, Jason Fung, who's the archivist of the museum, is we're trying to create an archive for oral history. And I bring that up because we don't have oral histories that many of Korean and Vietnam veterans. So we're trying to reach out to the community. Hopefully some folks listening to this podcast can think of some veterans in mind that maybe be willing to share their stories, because we don't have that. Now, it's important to have that. Many people should be aware that these stories live on, and we want the next generations to learn from them, right? What did these men and women face during their time in the military? How did their families react to their experience? It's kind of like taking a glimpse back into time, right? Through one person's perspective. And we think it's incredibly important to do that. We're here to protect your story, and we want to use your story to teach other people about the experience.
Right. We want to know you.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Right.
And also, do you have educator resources?
We do. If you check out our website under education, the tab, we do have several resources. And one of the things we have going on right now is that we have funding available for teachers, for schools to come to the museum, and we're able to reimburse their transportation. We're able to cover the admission, and we provide lunch and snacks for the student, and we're able to do activities with them and send them home with the museum souvenir. And that's a really great opportunity for schools that, I know right now budgets are being cut everywhere, but we're able to provide that if a teacher is interested. The maximum number of students is only 40 because our museum is a bit small. So we don't want about 300 kids in there, and we want to make sure we can.
Yeah. So how can we contribute to make the museum grow?
Yes. I think supporting, not even monetary, just supporting by word of mouth, by saying, hey, I visited this museum. It's great. Even what you're doing right now, Blanca, this is fantastic because you're putting the museum out there, right? Again, not many people know we're there, but we're able to now to tell people and teach people about this history. Come by, visit, ask questions, send us emails if you ever have a question or a connection to your story. We really appreciate that. In the next coming months, this summer, we're going to be hosting a very large Juneteenth event at the museum, in which, as I mentioned, the living history historians will be there. They're going to set up an encampment in which people can walk through, ask questions, see how it was during that period. It's going to solely be focused on the USCT, which is the United States Colored Troops, that time frame. because that is the time frame in which Juneteenth occurred during here in the United States. And so we're also going to bring in panelists to talk about this history and in a way also demystify Juneteenth, right? Many people have one perspective of Juneteenth, but like I shared with you earlier, even the folks in Nacimiento, Mexico have a story, right?
Yes.
So we want to definitely tie this together and have people understand that this is not just the story of African Americans, of Black people. It's also the story of us, humans, right? A human experience.
Yeah. So we'll have the opportunity to walk back in time.
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How interesting. That's going to be fun.
Oh, definitely. Yes.
You have to come back and talk to us about that.
I will.
But so at this time, are you taking any volunteers or?
We always are open for volunteers. We're also open to, in the future, have a docent core program. So please keep a lookout on our website. We are not taking any interns this semester because, as I mentioned, we are going to be going into the renovation soon. But we do like to invite interns of different backgrounds. It doesn't need to be history or museum studies because we want to open our doors to different college students. Please reach out to us, specifically myself, and work with us. We've had a great group of students come through from TSU, HCC, from U of H. Yeah, it's been great working with them because we get to share our knowledge with these students.
Yeah. Well, Michelle, what is your website address and a phone number if people want to get more information?
We are located at buffalosoldiersmuseum.org. We are located at 3816 Caroline Street, which is in Midtown, across the street from HCC. Our phone number is 713-942-8920. And if anyone has any questions about education programs, they can reach me at michelle.tovar@buffalosoldiersmuseum.org.
I hope that people go and visit your website.
Yes.
And because there's so much information there. And you're definitely going to want to know everything you possibly can, maybe before you go to the museum. That way you'll know what you're looking at and you can have more questions to ask and definitely have a lot of fun. So I understand that it's also a rental venue that
Yes.
Can they still do that?
Yes,
Even
I
with the
believe up
renovation?
until maybe the last of May, people will be able to do rentals. And I suggest contacting Ethel Grant. She's on our website. She's the director of operations who's in charge of the space. It's a very beautiful gallery. We've had weddings, festivals. Hopefully in the next month or two, we're going to be hosting the Houston Poetry Festival there in partnership with them. It's a wonderful space.
Well, Dr. Michelle Tovar, I have been so excited to have you here.
Well,
I'm
thank
so
you.
glad you could join me. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Blanca.
And thank you for letting us know what all we can expect to see and do at the museum of the Buffalo Soldier Museum. And it's also, as mentioned earlier, it's a national museum.
Yes. Mhm.
And we don't have too many national museums here in Houston.
Not too many.
So yeah, let's go and support it and have fun and learn a lot about our history. So of course, I'd like to thank you all as well for joining me for this edition of Spotlight Houston. And please send me your comments. And if you have any story ideas, also please let me know.